I was in the north pasture at 7:40 when I saw the smoke. Not a brush fire, not a fence post. The color was brown-black, the column wide, the specific signature of burning dry hay, and I knew it before I had consciously finished the thought. I was back in the truck and driving the ranch road toward the eastern boundary before the thought completed itself. I stopped at the fence line at 7:44 a.m. I did not exit the truck. I picked up the camera first. The shelter was fully involved. All 340 bales of second-cut Timothy, my cattle herd's full winter feed supply, burning from the base up. $31,000, gone by 8 o'clock. 2 men in work clothes were standing at the boundary fence on the other side, watching. Neither was attempting suppression. One had a clipboard. A pickup truck was parked behind them on the Creekside Commons access road. Magnetic door sign on the driver's panel. Cutler Property Services, licensed contractor, general remediation. I photographed the burning shelter. I photographed the 2 men. I photographed the truck, the door sign, and the license plate. Then I called 911. Then I called my attorney. Then I called my neighbor, Calvin. 22 years with the County Water Authority. I asked him one question. Under my private impoundment permit, what is the required notification procedure for a full discharge maintenance operation? He pulled the permit record. He read me the answer. 48 hours advance notice to the State Water Authority. No notification to adjacent landowners. No notification to downstream property owners. No notification to any other party. I wrote it in the logbook margin and underlined the last 4 words. The pond was at 94% of full autumn pool. The maintenance window had been overdue for 2 weeks. Wait, before we dive in, comment where you're tuning in from, light up that like button, and smash subscribe for more fire stories. The Marsh family has owned the 340 acres at the base of the southern slope since 1961. Longer than the county road that runs along its eastern edge has been paved. Longer than the power lines that cross its northern corner have been strung. Longer than anyone currently living in the residential development visible from its eastern fence line has been alive. Raymond Marsh bought the land in a single transaction in 1961. Pasture, slope, creek corridor, and the flat valley floor that would become, over the following decades, the most productive hay ground in that section of the district. He ran cattle on the slope and hay on the flat, and built the operation incrementally, the way agricultural operations are built by people who understand that land responds to patience and consistent management rather than ambition and capital expenditure. He added a second pasture rotation in 1968. He extended the hay ground in 1974. He built the equipment barn in 1979 and the calving shed in 1983. And in 1988, he sat down with his son Gideon, 30 years old at the time, freshly credentialed as an agricultural engineer, and recently returned to the property after 4 years working for a county water management firm, and told him there was a project he had been thinking about for a long time, and that now he had someone qualified to design it properly. The project was the pond. The seasonal creek that runs through the Marsh property's southern section had been producing irrigation water for the hay ground since Raymond acquired the land, but its flow was inconsistent, strong in spring, reduced in summer, the variable supply pattern of a seasonal system that depends on snowmelt and rain rather than a permanent water table source. Raymond had been managing around the inconsistency for 27 years. What he wanted was an impoundment, a storage system that would capture the spring flow and hold it through the dry months, smoothing the supply curve and giving the hay operation reliable irrigation through August, rather than rationing it after July. Gideon designed the impoundment over the winter of 1987 and 1988. He surveyed the southern slope himself, identified the natural basin where the creek's gradient flattened before the valley floor, and calculated the impoundment dimensions. A 4.2-acre surface area at full pool, a maximum depth of 18 feet at the dam face, a concrete spillway at the southern end, designed to handle the 100-year storm event with a controlled release gate for operational management, and a full discharge bypass for maintenance and emergency drawdown. He filed the design with the State Water Authority in March 1988 and received the private impoundment permit, registration WA-1988-447 in June. The permit grants the Marsh property full operational control of the impoundment, including the spillway gate, under the condition of annual reporting to the Water Authority and compliance with the 48-hour advance notification requirement for any full discharge operation. Construction ran through the summer of 1988. Raymond and Gideon built the dam face together, hired a concrete contractor for the spillway structure, and had the impoundment at first filled by October. By the spring of 1989, the pond was at full pool, 4.2 acres of still water on the southern slope, the creek feeding it from the north, the spillway managing its southern face, the culvert system Gideon had engineered, carrying controlled releases under the access road and into the drainage corridor that ran along the property's southern boundary toward the valley floor. Gideon has been managing the impoundment for 36 years. He knows its behavior in every season, the spring fill rate, the summer evaporation curve, the autumn drawdown that brings it to the maintenance level before the first hard frost, the winter ice formation pattern on the northern shallows. He has opened the spillway gate for controlled release 400 times, and for full maintenance discharge 11 times in 36 years. He has filed every required report with the State Water Authority on schedule. The permit has never lapsed, never been cited for a violation, never been the subject of any regulatory inquiry of any kind. Raymond transferred the property to Gideon in 1995. The full 340 acres, the equipment, the cattle herd, and the impoundment permit transferred under a clean deed with no encumbrances and no reservations. Gideon has run the operation alone since then, with occasional help from his son Phil during the planting and harvest seasons. Phil is 38, a civil engineer in the county seat, and he understands the impoundment's engineering the way the son of an agricultural engineer understands the infrastructure his father designed. Not as an abstraction, but as a physical system with specific capacities and specific behaviors, the numbers as familiar as the landscape. In June of 2003, Gideon watches the development go in from his eastern fence line. The Creekside Commons project breaks ground on the plateau east of the Marsh property in the spring of 2003. 190 residential lots carved from former agricultural land. The development's western edge graded to meet the drainage corridor that has been running along the Marsh property's eastern boundary for 15 years. Gideon watches the grading crew reshape the corridor from the fence line one afternoon in June. They widen it, regrade its banks, and install a concrete channel section at its northern end. No one from the development contacts him. No county planning officer calls him. The corridor work proceeds as part of the development's stormwater management infrastructure, without any communication with the upstream property owner, whose impoundment feeds it. He calls the county planning office that afternoon. The planner on duty tells him the drainage corridor has been designated a stormwater management zone in the development approval, and that the developer's civil engineer has prepared a hydraulic capacity analysis for the corridor as part of the approved drainage plan. Gideon asks whether the hydraulic analysis accounts for the upstream impoundment's operational parameters. The planner tells him the analysis is based on standard upstream discharge assumptions from the registered impoundment permit. Gideon thanks him and ends the call. He writes the exchange in the logbook, the date, the planner's name, the information provided, the phrase standard upstream discharge assumptions. He looks at the phrase for a moment. He knows what his impoundment's full discharge volume is. He designed the spillway. He knows the numbers. He writes one additional line below the exchange record. Corridor capacity basis, controlled release assumption, full discharge, unconfirmed against corridor rating. Note for future reference. Then he closes the logbook and goes back to work. The development fills over the following 2 years. By 2005, all 190 lots are sold and occupied. The community clubhouse is open, and the Creekside Commons HOA is operating under its founding board. The development is visible from Gideon's eastern fence line, roof lines on the plateau, the occasional sound of a lawnmower or a car door in the still summer air, the particular presence of a residential neighborhood where agricultural land used to be. Gideon notes this the way he notes everything about his property's context, with attention and without opinion. The development is there. Its drainage corridor runs along his boundary. His impoundment feeds that corridor at controlled release, the way it has fed the valley floor drainage since 1989. The arrangement works as long as nobody changes anything. For 18 years, nobody does. The first Creekside Commons HOA letter arrives in the third week of September, a Tuesday, in the Morning Mail, a single page on HOA letterhead with the Creekside Commons logo at the top, and a signature at the bottom over the printed name, Lorraine Cutler, board president. Gideon reads it at the kitchen table with his coffee. The letter informs him that his eastern boundary hay shelter has been identified as a violation of the Creekside Commons community's view corridor easement standards and requests its removal within 30 days. It describes the shelter as an unsightly agricultural structure, inconsistent with the community's aesthetic standards and incompatible with the view corridor easement that governs the properties adjacent to the development's western boundary. It invites him to contact the HOA's community liaison with questions. Gideon sets the letter down and looks at the kitchen window for a moment. He has been stacking hay in the eastern boundary shelter since 2001. The shelter is an open-sided field structure, a roof on posts, no walls, the standard agricultural hay storage format used across the district, sitting 12 feet inside his property line on land he has owned since 1995, and his family has owned since 1961. This September's stack is 340 bales of second-cut Timothy harvested in August, his cattle herd's full winter feed supply, valued at $31,000, and representing the difference between a herd that comes through winter in working condition and a herd that does not. He picks the letter back up and reads it again. He notes the phrase, view corridor easement, and the particular confidence with which it is deployed, as an established legal instrument, as a recorded right, as the kind of enforceable standard that a board president puts in a violation letter, because it exists in the county records and can be cited and acted upon. The phrase carries the administrative weight of documented authority. It reads like something real. He writes, the letter's arrival in the logbook. September 19th. HO a letter from Lorraine Cutler, Creekside Commons. Claims view corridor easement. Requests shelter removal in 30 days. Letter retained. File open. Then he finishes his coffee, puts on his jacket, and drives to the county recorder's office. He is at the public access terminal by 10 a.m. He pulls his eastern boundary deed, the 1995 transfer from Raymond, clean and unencumbered, and reads the full boundary description. He pulls the Creekside Commons Development Approval Index and reads every recorded instrument associated with the 2003 development, the plat, the CC and RS, the Stormwater Management Zone designation, the drainage corridor easement recorded against the developer's parcels. He reads every recorded instrument associated with his eastern boundary in connection with the Creekside Commons development. There is no view corridor easement. There is no recorded instrument of any kind that establishes an aesthetic standard, a sightline restriction, a view protection right, or any other encumbrance affecting Gideon's eastern boundary parcels in connection with the Creekside Commons development or any other party. The phrase view corridor easement does not appear in the county recorder's system in connection with his property. It does not appear in the development approval. It does not appear in the CC and Rs. It does not appear anywhere in the public record as a legal instrument affecting his land. He photographs the relevant deed pages, his eastern boundary description, clean and unencumbered. He photographs the Development Approval Index page, which lists every recorded instrument and does not list a view corridor easement affecting adjacent properties. He photographs the CC and Rs cover page and the recorded easement section, which establishes drainage corridor rights against the developer's own parcels, and nothing else. He drives home. He puts the photographs in a folder and writes a second logbook entry beside the morning's first one. County Recorder's Office, 10 to 11:15 a.m. Eastern Boundary Deed, clean, no encumbrances. Development Approval Index, no view corridor easement recorded. CC and Rs, no adjacent property restrictions. No view corridor easement in county records. Letter retained. File open. He puts the folder in the filing cabinet in the office, the same cabinet where the impoundment permit has been filed since 1988, and the property deed has been filed since 1995, and he goes out to check the afternoon cattle rotation. The hay shelter stands at the eastern boundary in the September afternoon, 340 bales of second-cut Timothy under the roof on posts, 12 feet inside the deed line, exactly where it has stood every September since 2001. The Creekside Commons roof line is visible above the tree line on the plateau to the east. The drainage corridor runs between the boundary fence and the development's western tier, carrying its normal autumn flow from the impoundment's controlled release toward the valley floor drainage. Gideon looks at the shelter. He looks at the roof line. He goes back to work. He calls Phil that evening and reads him the letter. Phil is quiet for a moment. "View corridor easement," he says, not a question. The careful repetition of a civil engineer who understands recorded instruments and recognizes a term being used without one behind it. Gideon tells him there is nothing in the county records. Phil asks what he is going to do. Gideon tells him he is going to write back. He tells Phil he has the photographs of the deed pages and the development index. He tells him he has a folder and a logbook entry, and 30 days before the compliance deadline, and that a rancher who documents everything and reacts to nothing is a rancher whose position when the moment comes is exactly as strong as the patience he brought to building it. Phil says he has heard that before. Gideon tells him it has been true every time. He ends the call and looks out the kitchen window at the eastern boundary in the last of the September light. The shelter visible as a dark shape against the field, the hay stacked under the roof. $31,000 of winter feed, sitting 12 feet inside a deed line that has been clean and unencumbered since 1961. He closes the logbook. The file is open. Lorraine Cutler became the Creekside Commons HOA board president 6 years ago by running unopposed at the annual membership meeting. The particular electoral outcome of a community where most residents consider board service an obligation rather than an opportunity, and where the person most willing to do the work inherits the role by default. She took the role seriously from the first week. She read the CC&Rs cover to cover. She reviewed the violation history the previous board had accumulated. 43 notices in 4 years, a compliance rate she assessed as inadequate, and she restructured the violation process. Standardized notice language, escalating formality at each stage, a contractor remediation provision that made the HOA's willingness to act rather than wait the operative message of every letter she sent. In 6 years, she has issued 340 formal violation notices. The compliance rate, which she reports quarterly in the HOA newsletter, under the heading Community Standards Enforcement Update, is 91%. The number is accurate. Of the 340 notices, 309 produced compliance, structures removed, vehicles relocated, landscaping corrected, paint colors changed. The remaining 31 cases resolved through a combination of property sales, membership departures, and second notices that delivered the contractor remediation language, with enough specificity that the recipient concluded compliance was simpler than the alternative. She has not, in 6 years, issued a violation notice to a recipient who drove to the county recorder's office the same day it arrived and spent an hour and 15 minutes at the public access terminal pulling the instruments behind it. She does not know Gideon did this. His response has not arrived yet. The 30-day compliance window is still open. From Lorraine's perspective, the September letter has been sent, the 30-day clock is running, and the eastern boundary hay shelter, which she can see from the western tier walking path on clear mornings, a brown shape against the field beyond the fence line, is a violation that will resolve on the standard timeline through the standard process. She is not thinking about Gideon Marsh specifically. She is managing 190 households and their surrounding properties with the same administrative momentum that has produced a 91% compliance rate. And the Marsh letter is one item in a violation tracking spreadsheet that currently has 11 open cases, of which the eastern boundary hay shelter is ranked 4th in priority, behind a fence height issue on the northern tier, an unapproved outbuilding in the central section, and a landscaping dispute between 2 members on the eastern road. She is thinking about the hay shelter the way she thinks about most open violation cases, as a compliance timeline problem with a known resolution mechanism, not as a legal dispute with a neighbor who has already confirmed that the instrument her letter cites does not exist. The 30 days expire on a Tuesday in late October. She adds the case to Wednesday morning's violation review and upgrades it to the second stage notice, the formal escalation that she has used 340 times to produce the compliance rate she reports quarterly, written in the elevated register of institutional authority, carrying the weight of a board president who has never had reason to doubt that the weight is real. The second letter arrives in Gideon's mailbox on day 31. It is a different document from the first, longer, more formal in structure, organized in the numbered paragraph format of a legal notice rather than the plain paragraph format of an administrative communication. The first paragraph identifies the original notice date, and the elapsed compliance period. The second describes the hay shelter in specific terms: an unsightly agricultural storage structure, inconsistent with Creekside Commons community aesthetic standards, and incompatible with the view corridor easement governing properties adjacent to the development's western boundary. The third paragraph elevates the matter to a formal violation of record, a designation that, in Lorraine's violation process, means the case is now documented in the HOA's official records and is subject to the contractor remediation provision. The fourth paragraph states the contractor remediation provision directly. The HOA reserves the right to engage a licensed contractor to remediate the violation and to bill the cost of remediation to the adjacent property owner if compliance is not achieved within 15 additional days from the date of this notice. It is signed by Lorraine Cutler, board president, with the board's official seal embossed beside the signature. It does not cite a recorded easement by instrument number. It does not attach a county document. It does not identify the legal basis for the view corridor easement by reference to any recorded instrument because the view corridor easement does not exist in the county records as a recorded instrument. And Lorraine has never needed to produce its legal basis in 6 years of violation enforcement because no recipient has ever asked for it. The phrase view corridor easement first appeared in Lorraine's violation vocabulary 4 years ago when she was reviewing the developer's 2003 community marketing brochure, a glossy document produced for the original lot sales that described the Creekside Commons community as a development with carefully preserved view corridors and natural boundary aesthetics. The phrase appeared in the marketing copy as a community feature description, the kind of language that developers use to sell the idea of a neighborhood to prospective buyers. Lorraine read it and understood it as a recorded legal standard. She added it to the HOA's violation notice template. She has cited it in 47 notices over 4 years. 47 recipients have complied, objected informally, or moved without asking Lorraine to produce the instrument behind it. Gideon reads the second letter at the kitchen table the same way he read the first, completely, from the first word to the last, with the specific attention of a man who reads official-sounding documents for what they say rather than how they sound. He photographs it. He adds it to the folder beside the first letter and the county recorder photographs. He writes the receipt in the logbook. October 21st, second HOA letter, formal violation designation, contractor remediation threat, 15-day window, no easement instrument cited, no county document attached, letter retained. Then he sits at the kitchen desk and writes his response. It is 1 page. He writes it in the plain, direct language he uses for all formal correspondence. Not aggressive, not apologetic, not hedging. It states facts in sequence. The first paragraph informs Lorraine that he received her letter of October 21st and has reviewed its contents. The second paragraph informs her that he conducted a review of the county recorder's records following her September notice and found no view corridor easement affecting his eastern boundary property in the county recorder's system. No recorded instrument of any kind establishing an aesthetic standard or sightline restriction against his parcels in connection with the Creekside Commons development, and no legal basis of any kind for the view corridor easement standard cited in her violation notices. The third paragraph states that the hay shelter is located on his private property, 12 feet inside his recorded deed line, that his deed is unencumbered by any easement, right-of-way, or restriction of any kind, and that he does not intend to remove the shelter. The fourth paragraph states that he is attaching photocopies of the relevant county records for her reference, his eastern boundary deed description, clean and unencumbered, and the Creekside Commons Development Approval Index, which does not list a view corridor easement among its recorded instruments. He does not threaten. He does not request a response. He states his position and attaches the documents that support it, and signs it with his name and the date. He sends it certified mail the following morning. He keeps a copy for the folder. He sends a second copy to Dessa Wainwright, with a handwritten note clipped to the cover page. File this. I think we'll need it. Dessa Wainwright has practiced property rights law in the Ranch and Lake District for 18 years. She has an office in the county seat, a 2-attorney firm that handles ranch boundary disputes, water rights cases, agricultural easement matters, and the category of case that arrives most frequently in her district, a rural property owner with a documented legal position facing an institutional party that is operating on the assumption that administrative authority substitutes for recorded legal rights. She has been Gideon's attorney of record since 2018, when he retained her for a water rights confirmation matter on the impoundment permit's annual renewal. She knows his property, his permit, and his operational history. She knows the impoundment exists and what it does, and where its discharge goes. She filed the water rights confirmation herself and has the permit documentation in her client file. She reads Gideon's note, "File this. I think we'll need it," and reads the attached correspondence and county records photographs in a single sitting. She calls him the following week. She tells him the easement absence is confirmed from what he has sent her. The development approval index and his deed description are clear. She has her paralegal run an independent county recorder check, and the result is the same. No view corridor easement, no adjacent property restriction, no recorded instrument of any kind supporting the HOA's violation basis. She tells him Lorraine's contractor remediation language is legally meaningless. A homeowners association cannot engage a contractor to enter a neighboring private property owner's land and remove a structure that is entirely within that owner's deed boundary and subject to no recorded encumbrance of any kind. The HOA's Community Standards Authority extends to its member properties. The 190 lots within the development that are subject to the CC&Rs by virtue of the recorded covenants those owners accepted at purchase. It does not extend to adjacent private land owned by someone who never signed the CC&Rs and whose property carries no recorded instrument connecting it to the HOA's authority. She tells him this in the flat, unhurried language of an attorney, stating a principle that is not in dispute in the relevant case law and does not require extensive explanation. Then she tells him to call her immediately if Lorraine acts on the contractor provision. He asks what immediately means. She tells him, the moment he sees a contractor on or near his property, before anything happens, before he says a word to anyone on site. She tells him the documentation he builds in that moment, photographs, time, personnel identification, vehicle identification, is the foundation of whatever comes after it. And the foundation needs to be laid before the event concludes, rather than reconstructed from memory after it. He tells her he understands. He ends the call and opens the logbook, and writes the conversation summary in the margin beside the October 21st entry. DESA confirmed. No easement. HOA authority does not extend to private adjacent land. Contractor remediation language legally meaningless. Call her immediately if contractor appears. Then he goes to the eastern boundary and looks at the hay shelter. 340 bales of second-cut timothy under the roof on posts. 12 feet inside the deed line. The same structure in the same position it has occupied every September since 2001. The 15-day compliance window in Lorraine's second letter opened on October 21st. It closes on November 5th. He checks the shelter framing, checks the cover on the top bales, confirms the stack is tight and dry. He goes back to the equipment barn and runs the morning cattle rotation. He feeds the herd, checks the water lines, notes the impoundment level in the operational log. High autumn pool. The seasonal creek still running at post-harvest flow. The pond at 92% of full capacity after a wet September. He closes the operational log and goes inside. The folder is in the filing cabinet. The logbook is on the tack room shelf. The certified mail receipt for his response to Lorraine is in the folder. DESA's number is in his phone under Faber, a habit from years of working with attorneys who tell him the same thing every time. Call me immediately. He has called immediately every time it mattered. He will call immediately when it matters again. The 15-day window runs through the first week of November. Gideon checks the eastern boundary shelter every morning on the way to the cattle rotation. Not anxiously, not with the attention of someone who expects the situation to resolve without incident, but with the quiet, irregular attention of a man who has been told by his attorney to document what he sees and who understands that the documentary record begins before the event, not after it. Tanya Osei votes with the board on the contractor authorization at the November board session. A 4-to-1 vote approving engagement of Cutler Property Services to remediate the eastern boundary violation. She votes yes because she has not yet pulled the county records herself, and because Lorraine presents the vote as a routine enforcement action, and because the agenda moves quickly and the question of the view corridor easement's legal basis does not come up in the meeting. She will think about that vote later. She will think about it on a Wednesday morning in December, when she is standing in the clubhouse, watching the water rise in the drainage corridor outside the western windows, and understanding, with the professional clarity of a land use planner who knows what a drainage corridor capacity exceedance looks like, exactly what she is seeing, and exactly how the chain of decisions that produced it began. But that is later. On the first week of November, the contractor authorization has been approved, and the hay shelter is still standing, and Gideon's certified mail response to Lorraine is sitting in the HOA office with the county records photographs attached, unread by any attorney and unacted upon by any party who understands what a development approval index page without a view corridor easement entry means for the legal basis of the violation program that produced the contractor authorization vote. The folder is in Gideon's filing cabinet. The logbook entry reads, "Call her immediately. He will." The northern pasture rotation takes Gideon to the upper fence line by 7:30 on Thursday morning. The standard route, the standard time. The same circuit he has run on alternating days since October began. The cattle are at the north water trough. The sky is clear. The air has the particular stillness of a late October morning before the wind picks up, when sound carries across open ground, and the landscape holds the nights cold, an hour past sunrise. He sees the smoke at 7:40. It is coming from the southeast, from the direction of the eastern boundary, from the precise quadrant of the property where the hay shelter sits 12 feet inside the deed line, with 340 bales of second-cut timothy stacked under its roof. The smoke is not the thin gray thread of a brush fire or a fence post. It is the broad, rolling column of burning dry hay, a specific color between brown and black, a specific volume that a man who has spent 30 years on a working ranch recognizes before he has consciously identified it. The way any agricultural professional recognizes the particular signature of a fire that is consuming something large and dry and highly combustible. Gideon does not panic. He moves. He is back in his truck and driving the ranch road toward the eastern boundary before the smoke column has finished registering as a complete thought. He drives at the speed the ranch road allows, fast enough to cover the half-mile between the north pasture and the eastern fence in 4 minutes, controlled enough to keep the truck on the gravel rather than in the drainage ditch. He reaches the eastern boundary road at 7:44 and stops the truck on the ranch road side of the fence line. He does not exit the truck. He picks up the camera from the bench seat, the same camera he carries on the morning rotation, a habit from years of documenting equipment condition, fence line status, and anything on the property that needs a dated record, and he photographs through the windshield before he opens the door. The shelter is fully involved. All 340 bales, the stacked timothy burning from the base up through the stack in the way hay burns when the fire is started at the bottom rather than caught at the top. A specific burn pattern that Gideon notes without yet knowing the fire investigator will use the same language in his preliminary report 4 hours later. The open-sided structure's roof is burning. The post framing is burning. The hay is beyond any intervention. It is past the point where a hose or a shovel makes a difference, and he does not have a hose, and the situation is not a hose situation. 2 men in work clothes are standing at the boundary fence on the creekside commons side, watching the fire. They are not attempting to suppress it. They are not retreating from it. They are standing at the fence line in the attitude of people who are present at an event they directed, rather than people who are responding to an emergency. One of them holding a clipboard at his side, the other with a phone to his ear. A pickup truck is parked on the Creekside Commons access road behind them. It has a magnetic door sign on the driver's side panel, dark lettering on a white background, large enough to read from the ranch road. Cutler Property Services, licensed contractor, general remediation. Gideon photographs the burning shelter. He photographs the 2 men at the fence line, their faces, their body positions, the clipboard. He photographs the contractor truck. He photographs the magnetic door sign. He photographs the license plate. He photographs the fence line between the fire and the 2 men, the physical boundary that marks where his property ends and the Creekside Commons access corridor begins. He notes the time in the logbook on the bench seat, 7:44 a.m., October 23rd. Shelter burning, fully involved. 2 contractors at east boundary fence line, Creekside Commons side. Cutler Property Services vehicle, door sign photographed, plate documented. Then he exits the truck and calls 911. He gives the dispatcher his property address, describes the structure fire, confirms no persons are in danger, and provides the location detail, eastern boundary, visible from the county road. He is calm and specific in the way that people who have thought about emergencies in advance are calm and specific when emergencies arrive. The dispatcher confirms fire department response. He ends the call. He calls Dessa. It is 7:47. Dessa is in her office. She is always in her office by 7:30, and she picks up on the second ring. Gideon tells her in 4 sentences, the shelter is burning. 2 Cutler Property Services contractors are at the fence line. He has photographs of the vehicle and personnel, and the fire department is en route. Dessa is quiet for exactly 1 second. Then she tells him to keep photographing. She tells him to photograph the contractors continuously, their positions, their behavior, any equipment they have on site, any interaction with anyone who arrives. She tells him to say nothing to the contractors, nothing to anyone on the Creekside Commons side, nothing to anyone except the fire department personnel and her. She tells him she is starting a litigation file in the next 60 seconds, and she needs everything he photographs sent to her email before noon. He tells her it will be there. He ends the call. He makes the 3rd call at 7:52. Calvin Pruitt is 60 years old and has worked for the County Water Authority for 22 years, the last 9 as a senior inspector. He and Gideon worked for the same county water management firm in the mid-1980s. They were colleagues before Gideon returned to the ranch and Calvin moved to the public sector, and they have maintained the professional acquaintance of 2 engineers who share a technical vocabulary and a mutual respect for how water infrastructure actually works in the district. Gideon has been holding the question he asks Calvin since Dessa's call the previous week, the call in which she told him to document everything and call her immediately if Lorraine acted. He has been holding it the way he holds operational questions that require a specific answer before a decision can be made. Ready, waiting for the right moment, not asked until the moment is confirmed. The moment is confirmed at 7:44 a.m. on October 23rd when he sees the smoke. He asks Calvin one question. Under the terms of Private Impoundment Permit WA-1988-447, what is the required notification procedure for a full discharge maintenance operation? Calvin pulls the permit record. He is a water authority inspector. He has the database in front of him and the permit number in his system in under a minute. He reads Gideon the notification requirement. 48 hours advance notice to the State Water Authority office, submitted on the standard discharge notification form, identifying the permit number, the planned operation type, and the planned opening date and time. No notification to adjacent landowners is required. No notification to downstream property owners is required. No notification to any party other than the State Water Authority is required. Gideon thanks him and ends the call. He writes the answer in the logbook margin beside the 744 entry, in the smaller script he uses for marginal notations. Calvin Pruitt, Water Authority, Permit WA-1988-447 full discharge. 48-hour advance notice to Water Authority only. No other notification required. He underlines the last 4 words. The fire department arrives at 8:15. 2 engines and a brush truck. The response that a structure fire with agricultural fuel load draws in the district. The lead engine parks on the county road and runs a line through the gate. The structure is beyond saving. The firefighters focus on containment, keeping the fire from spreading to the fence line brush and the dry grass in the eastern boundary corridor. They work for 40 minutes. By 9 a.m., the shelter is a total loss. The hay gone, the roof structure collapsed, the post framing standing in places and burned through in others, the ground around the base black and wet from the suppression water. The 2 Cutler Property Services contractors are gone by the time the fire department arrives. They drove away while Gideon was on the phone with Calvin. He noted their departure in the logbook at 8:03 after photographing the truck's exit from the Creekside Commons access road. He has the departure time, the vehicle description, and the plate number. He has 12 photographs taken between 7:44 and 8:03. The fire investigator is a county employee assigned from the fire marshal's office, a standard deployment for a confirmed structure fire where the origin is not immediately apparent from the suppression crew's observations. He walks the burn site with Gideon at 8:45, after the suppression crew has cleared the immediate perimeter. He examines the base of the haystack location, the foundation-level burn pattern, the char depth, the distribution of the initial combustion evidence. He asks Gideon 2 questions: whether any ignition sources were present in the shelter prior to the fire, and whether Gideon observed the fire at its origin point. Gideon tells him there were no ignition sources in the shelter, no electrical equipment, no machinery, nothing combustible beyond the hay itself. He tells him he observed the fire from the northern pasture when it was already fully involved, and drove to the site within 4 minutes. The fire investigator takes photographs of the burn base. He takes samples. He writes in his field notes and tells Gideon he will have a preliminary report by end of day. The preliminary report arrives at 4:15 p.m. by email. Its relevant finding is 1 sentence in the origin and cause section. Fire origin consistent with accelerant application at base of hay storage stack. Spontaneous combustion, electrical fault, and accidental ignition inconsistent with observed burn pattern and char depth distribution. Gideon reads it once. He prints it. He adds it to the folder. He adds the logbook entry at 9 a.m. before the report arrives, recording the investigator's preliminary verbal observations from the site walk. He photographs the burned shelter from 4 angles: north, south, east, west. The post framing visible, the collapsed roof, the black ground, the boundary fence line in the background of the eastern shots, with the Creekside Commons access road visible beyond it. He uploads all 43 photographs from the morning, the pre-fire arrival images, the contractor documentation, the vehicle and plate photographs, the fire department arrival sequence, the post-suppression shelter documentation, and emails them to Dessa before noon with the logbook entry transcribed in the email body. Dessa replies in 18 minutes. File is open. Do not speak to the HOA, the contractor, or anyone associated with Creekside Commons. I will call you this afternoon. He reads the reply and closes his laptop. He looks out the kitchen window toward the eastern boundary. He cannot see the shelter from the kitchen. It is below the slope break, hidden by the tree line, but he can see the faint haze still hanging above the eastern fence corridor in the late morning air, the residual atmosphere of a fire that burned for 30 minutes before suppression and consumed $31,000 of winter feed in the process. He opens the operational log and checks the impoundment level. High autumn pool. The seasonal creek has been running strong since the wet September, and the pond is at 94% of full capacity. He notes the level in the log. He notes the date. He sits at the kitchen desk for a moment. 340 bales of second-cut Timothy. His cattle herd's full winter feed supply. Gone at 7:44 on a Thursday morning because a board president cited a marketing brochure phrase as a recorded easement and hired a contractor to act on it, and the contractor burned the hay rather than haul it because burning was faster, and the invoice would go to Gideon either way. He picks up the logbook and writes one final entry for the morning, in the margin below Calvin Pruitt's notification requirement answer, in the same small script. Impoundment, 94% full pool, autumn high water, maintenance window, pending decision. He caps the pen. He goes outside to check the cattle. The herd will need feed, not today, not this week. There is supplemental pasture through November in a normal year, and he can source emergency hay from 2 district suppliers he has worked with for 20 years. The logistical problem is solvable. He has solved larger logistical problems on this ranch without $31,000 and a litigation file, and an attorney who told him to call immediately, and a logbook with a notation about 48-hour notification requirements underlined in the margin. The logistical problem is not what he is thinking about. He is thinking about the drainage corridor. He is thinking about the 2003 developer's grading crew who reshaped it without calling him. He is thinking about the logbook entry from June of that year, standard upstream discharge assumptions, and the note he wrote below it. Full discharge, unconfirmed against corridor rating. Note for future reference. 21 years is a long time to carry a note for future reference. The future has arrived. Dessa Wainwright requests the full Creekside Commons 2003 development approval package from the county planning office at 8:15 Friday morning, the morning after the fire, and has it on her desk by 10. Not the index, the complete file. The index is what Gideon photographed in September when he pulled the development approval records, looking for the view corridor easement instrument that Lorraine's letter cited. The index confirmed the easement's absence. That was sufficient for the easement question. It is not sufficient for what DESA is now looking for, which is a different question entirely. A question that the photographic documentation from October 23rd and the fire investigator's preliminary report and Gideon's phone call from the northern pasture have made relevant in a way that the September easement research did not anticipate. She is looking for what the developer's engineer assumed about the upstream impoundment when he calculated the drainage corridor's capacity. The complete file is 412 pages. The site plan, the grading and drainage plan set, the civil engineering calculations package, the stormwater management zone designation instrument, the erosion control plan, the County Planning Commission's approval resolution, and the hydraulic capacity analysis that the developer's engineer prepared as the technical basis for the drainage corridor's stormwater management zone designation. DESA reads the hydraulic capacity analysis first. It is 23 pages, prepared by a civil engineering firm that no longer exists under its 2003 name, a standard development-era consulting shop that produced drainage analyses for residential projects across the district in the early 2000s, and whose work DESA has encountered in 3 previous water rights cases in the years since. She knows the analytical methodology, the formatting conventions, and the specific locations in the document structure where the upstream condition assumptions appear. She finds the assumption on page 7, in the section titled Upstream Inflow Parameters and Discharge Rate Basis. It reads, upstream impoundment discharge assumed at permitted controlled release rate per State Water Authority registration, WA-1988-447. Controlled release rate, 2.4 cubic feet per second. Corridor capacity analysis based on this discharge rate as maximum upstream inflow condition. She writes the sentence on her legal pad and underlines the phrase maximum upstream inflow condition. Then she opens the State Water Authority database and pulls permit WA-1988-447. The permit is the same document Gideon has in his filing cabinet and that Calvin Pruitt pulled from his inspector database on Thursday morning when Gideon called him from the eastern boundary fence line. DESA has seen it before. She filed the 2018 water rights confirmation on it and knows its structure. She goes directly to the operational specifications section. The controlled release rate for standard irrigation operations, 2.4 cubic feet per second. The full discharge rate for maintenance operations at high pool, 7.8 cubic feet per second. She writes both numbers on the legal pad. She draws a line under them and writes the ratio below the line. Full discharge, 3.25 times controlled release rate. She sits with the legal pad for a moment. Not the pause of uncertainty, but the pause of an attorney who has found the number she expected to find, and is now moving from the analytical phase to the strategic one. From the question of what the records show to the question of what the records mean for the shape of the case she is building. The drainage corridor running along Creekside Commons' western boundary was designed and rated by its own developer's engineer for a maximum upstream inflow of 2.4 cubic feet per second. That is, the controlled release rate from Gideon's impoundment, the rate at which he has operated the spillway for 36 years. The rate that the developer's engineer assumed would be the permanent operational ceiling when he calculated the corridor's capacity in 2003. The rate that produces a stormwater management zone that functions correctly, as long as the upstream impoundment never opens to full discharge. Full discharge from permit WA-1988-447 produces 7.8 cubic feet per second. The corridor was rated for 2.4. The ratio is 3.25 to 1. DESA has handled water rights cases for 18 years. She has seen drainage corridor capacity exceedances in 3 previous matters involving upstream impoundments and downstream development infrastructure. She knows what a factor of 3 exceedance looks like when the downstream corridor has residential properties on its banks. The fill rate, the overflow timeline, the inundation depth at the point where the corridor's rated capacity is exceeded, and the water has nowhere to go except laterally into the adjacent grade. She knows what the western tier of Creekside Commons looks like from the county road. She drove it 2 weeks ago when she was pulling the development approval index for the easement research. She saw the western tier lots, the rear yards backing to the drainage corridor, the graded banks, the residential landscaping running to the corridor edge. She picks up the phone and calls Gideon. It is 2:15 Friday afternoon. She tells him the civil complaint is ready to file. She has the cause of action structure built: destruction of private property, the hay shelter and its contents, conversion of the Timothy stockpile valued at $31,000, and trespass by the HOA's contractor in the execution of an action directed against a private structure on land to which the HOA has no authority, recorded or otherwise. The evidentiary foundation is the fire investigator's preliminary report noting accelerant-consistent origin, the 43 photographs from October 23rd, and the contractor vehicle and personnel identification from the Cutler Property Services magnetic door sign and license plate documentation. She tells him Exhibit A through Exhibit F are ready. She tells him the filing can go to the courthouse Monday morning. Then she tells him about the drainage corridor. She reads him the sentence from page 7 of the hydraulic analysis. Upstream impoundment discharge assumed at permitted controlled release rate per State Water Authority registration, WA-1988-447. She reads him the controlled release rate, 2.4 cubic feet per second. She tells him the corridor's rated capacity is based on that number as the maximum upstream inflow condition. Then she tells him the full discharge rate under his permit, 7.8 cubic feet per second. She gives him the ratio. Gideon is quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man who designed the spillway himself, who knows the impoundment's full discharge volume the way he knows the ranch's operational specifications, who has carried the June 2003 logbook notation about standard upstream discharge assumptions and unconfirmed corridor ratings for 21 years, and is now hearing those two numbers placed side by side for the first time by someone who has read both source documents in the same sitting. He asks Dessa whether opening the spillway to full discharge for scheduled maintenance is within his permit rights. She tells him it is entirely within his permit rights. The permit grants full operational control of the impoundment and the spillway gate. Scheduled maintenance discharge, the seasonal drawdown operation that brings the impoundment to its winter maintenance level, is a standard permitted operation that he has performed 11 times in 36 years. The required notification is 48 hours advance notice to the State Water Authority on the standard discharge notification form. No notification to adjacent landowners is required. No notification to downstream property owners is required. No notification to the Creekside Commons HOA, its board president, its attorneys, or any of the 17 homeowners whose rear yards border the drainage corridor is required under any provision of his permit or any statute she is aware of. He is the permitted operator of a private impoundment on his own land. He can open the spillway gate at any time for any permitted operational purpose, with 48 hours notice to the water authority. That is what the permit says. Gideon thanks her. He ends the call. He opens the logbook on the kitchen desk and writes a single entry below the morning's accumulated notations: the fire record, the contractor documentation, the Calvin Pruitt notification requirement confirmation, the impoundment level reading, the pending maintenance window note. He writes it in 4 lines. Dessa called, 2:15 p.m. Drainage corridor capacity basis, 2.4 cubic feet per second, controlled release. Full discharge permit rate, 7.8 cubic feet per second. Factor of 3 over rated capacity. Maintenance window, pending. He caps the pen. He looks at the 4 lines for a moment. He has been an agricultural engineer for 40 years. He designed the spillway. He ran the drainage calculations himself in the winter of 1987 and 1988, sitting at the same desk where the logbook is open now, working from the topographic survey of the southern slope and the creek's measured flow data. He knows what 7.8 cubic feet per second looks like coming out of the culvert at the bottom of his access road. He knows how quickly it fills the drainage corridor at that volume. He knows what happens when a corridor rated for 2.4 reaches the banks of the adjacent grade at 7.8. He is not a vindictive man. He has not been operating the ranch for 30 years on the basis of vindication. He operates it on the basis of what the land requires, what the cattle require, what the infrastructure requires, and what his legal rights as the owner of the property and the permitted operator of its impoundment allow him to do. The impoundment is at 94% of full autumn pool. The seasonal drawdown operation, the scheduled maintenance discharge that brings the pond to its winter level, is overdue by 2 weeks. He has delayed it because October was unusually wet, and he was managing the timing against the pasture irrigation schedule. It needs to happen before the first hard frost, which the County Weather Service is forecasting for the second week of November. The maintenance window is not theoretical. It is not a strategic instrument. It is an operational requirement of a 36-year-old private impoundment that needs its seasonal drawdown on a normal schedule, managed by its permitted operator in accordance with the notification requirements of a state water authority permit that has never lapsed and never been cited for a violation. He calls Phil that evening. Phil answers on the second ring. Gideon tells him about the fire investigator's report. He tells him about the complaint DESA is filing Monday. He tells him about the drainage corridor records DESA pulled, the hydraulic analysis assumption, the controlled release basis, the full discharge rate, the ratio. Phil is quiet for a longer moment than usual. He asks his father if he is planning to run the seasonal maintenance discharge. Gideon tells him the impoundment is at 94% of full pool, and the drawdown is 2 weeks overdue, and the hard frost window opens in 10 days. Phil asks about the drainage corridor. Gideon tells him what DESA told him. The corridor is rated for the controlled release rate. Full discharge exceeds the rated capacity by a factor of 3. The western tier of Creekside Commons has 17 properties backing to the corridor. Phil asks if Lorraine's house is on the western tier. Gideon tells him it is the 4th property from the southern end. Phil is quiet again. Then he asks one question. The civil engineering question. The question he asks as a professional rather than as a son. What is the estimated inundation depth at the western tier lot line at full discharge volume and high pool input rate, given the corridor's current rated capacity and the adjacent grade elevation? Gideon tells him. Phil says nothing for a moment. Then he says, "Call me Monday after the filing." Gideon tells him he will. He ends the call and closes the logbook and looks out the kitchen window at the eastern boundary in the evening dark. The burned shelter invisible from the kitchen, but present in the landscape the way a loss is present, as an absence where something was, as a gap in the familiar outline of a property that has been managed and documented and legally defended since the morning of October 23rd, with the same patience it has been managed for 63 years before that. The folder is in the filing cabinet. The complaint is ready. The impoundment is at 94%. The maintenance window opens when he decides it opens. DESA files the complaint at 8:50 Monday morning. She has been at the courthouse since 8:15. The filing window opens at 8:30, and she wanted to be first through it. Not for tactical reasons, but for the practical reason that a Monday morning filing in the first week of November at the county courthouse has a specific processing timeline, and she wants the case number assigned and the service clock running before noon. The complaint is 31 pages and 6 exhibits, organized in the structure she uses for property damage cases, where the evidentiary record is documentary rather than testimonial. Causes of action first, factual background second. Exhibit references integrated into the factual narrative so that a judge reading the complaint for the first time can move from the legal claim to the supporting evidence without breaking the thread of either. The first cause of action is destruction of private property. The hay shelter and its contents, 340 bales of second-cut timothy, $31,000 at current market rate, were destroyed by fire on the morning of October 23rd by agents acting under the direction of the Creekside Commons HOA, executing a contractor remediation action purportedly authorized by a view corridor easement that does not exist in the county recorder's system. The structure was on private property. The contents were private property. No legal authority authorized the action that destroyed them. The second cause of action is conversion. The timber stockpile, the $31,000 winter feed supply, was converted from Gideon's possession and use by the deliberate act of the HOA's contractor. Conversion does not require physical removal. Destruction of personal property in the execution of an unauthorized act constitutes conversion under state law, and the fire investigator's preliminary report establishing accelerant consistent origin removes the possibility of accidental or incidental causation from the defendant's available defenses. The third cause of action is trespass. Cutler Property Services personnel crossed onto land adjacent to Gideon's eastern boundary in the execution of the HOA's remediation directive, accessing the fence line corridor and executing an action whose effects extended onto Gideon's private property. The boundary fence line is documented in the October 23rd photographs. The contractor's position at the fence line is documented. The fire's origin on Gideon's side of the fence is documented in the investigator's report. Exhibit A is the eastern boundary deed, the 1995 transfer from Raymond, clean and unencumbered. The boundary description, confirming the shelter's position 12 feet inside the deed line. Exhibit B is the County Development Approval Index, the same page Gideon photographed in September, showing the recorded instruments associated with the Creekside Commons development and the absence of any view corridor easement among them. Exhibit C is Lorraine's 2 violation letters, the September notice and the October formal escalation with its contractor remediation provision. Exhibit D is Gideon's certified mail response, with the deed photocopy and development index photocopy attached, the certified mail receipt confirming delivery, and Lorraine's failure to respond or retract the contractor remediation threat in the days following receipt. Exhibit E is the photographic documentation from October 23rd. All 43 photographs organized in chronological sequence: the burning shelter, the 2 contractors at the fence line, the clipboard, the Cutler Property Services vehicle, the magnetic door sign, the license plate, the departure sequence, the post-suppression shelter documentation. Exhibit F is the fire investigator's preliminary report, the county fire marshal's office document bearing the investigator's signature and his finding. Fire origin consistent with accelerant application at base of hay storage stack. Dessa walks out of the courthouse at 9:40 with the case number written on the top of her copy of the complaint and calls Gideon from the courthouse steps. She tells him it is filed. She tells him the case number. She tells him service on the 3 defendants, Lorraine Cutler personally, Creekside Commons HOA, and Cutler Property Services, will be completed by end of week through the county process server. Gideon thanks her and ends the call. He is standing at his kitchen desk when she calls, the logbook open, the Monday morning cattle rotation already done, the impoundment level checked and noted in the operational log at 7 a.m., 94% full pool, the seasonal creek still contributing at its autumn rate, the pond holding the water it has been collecting since September, in the particular Spillway of a full impoundment on a cold November morning. He opens the State Water Authority's online notification portal at 9:50. The discharge notification form is a single page, the same form he has filed 11 times in 36 years. The standard instrument that permits the seasonal maintenance full discharge operation that brings the impoundment from its high autumn pool to its winter maintenance level. He fills it in with the precision of a man who has filed the same form 11 times and knows its fields. Permit number WA-1988-447. Operation type, scheduled maintenance, full discharge. Planned opening date, Wednesday, November 6th. Planned opening time, 7 a.m. Anticipated duration, 11 to 12 hours. Plans closing time, approximately 6 p.m. He reads the form once. He submits it at 9:58. The confirmation arrives in his email at 10:03. The State Water Authority's automated acknowledgement, the form reference number, the confirmation that notification has been received and logged against permit WA-1988-447, in compliance with the permit's advance notification requirement. He prints the confirmation. He adds it to the operational log with the date and time. He writes the filing in the logbook. 10:03 a.m., November 4th. Water Authority notification submitted. Permit WA-1988-447. Full discharge maintenance operation. Wednesday, November 6th, 7 a.m. The notification went to the State Water Authority office in the county seat, the single required recipient, the only party the permit requires to receive advance notice of a full discharge operation. It did not go to Lorraine Cutler. It did not go to the Creekside Commons HOA Board, its general counsel, its community liaison, or its newsletter distribution list. It did not go to the 17 homeowners on the development's western tier whose rear yards back to the drainage corridor. It did not go to Roy Cutler, who works from home on Wednesdays, and who will be the one who calls the county emergency line when the water reaches his back door threshold. None of these notifications are required. Gideon sent exactly what the permit requires to exactly who the permit requires it to go to, filed the confirmation in the operational log, and went to check on the afternoon cattle rotation. He calls Phil at 6:30. Phil answers on the first ring. He has been waiting for the call since Saturday, since the evening conversation where his father read him the drainage corridor numbers, and he ran the civil engineering arithmetic in his head, in the silence on the phone line, and said nothing for a moment, and then asked his father to call him, Monday after the filing. Gideon tells him the complaint is filed. He gives him the case number. He tells him the maintenance window opens Wednesday at 7 a.m. Phil asks about the drainage corridor. Not the abstract question, the specific one. He asks whether the corridor's current physical condition, the late-season vegetation and sediment accumulation that typically reduces an earthen drainage channel's functional capacity below its rated design capacity, has been factored into the analysis. Gideon tells him DES's analysis used the rated design capacity from the 2003 hydraulic analysis. The actual functional capacity in November, after a wet September and October with elevated sediment transport, is likely lower than the rated design figure. Phil is quiet for a moment. Then he asks if Lorraine knows about the impoundment, not whether she knows the pond exists, but whether she knows what the pond's full discharge volume means for the corridor that runs along her development's western boundary. Gideon tells him what he knows. Lorraine can see the pond from the development's western tier on a clear day. It is visible from the walking path along the western boundary, a flat, still surface on the slope above the property line, the concrete spillway face visible at its southern end, the culvert outlet visible at the base of the access road, where the discharge enters the drainage corridor. She has been looking at it from the walking path for as long as she has been board president. She has never contacted him about it. She has never asked what its full discharge volume is. She has never read the hydraulic analysis on page 7 of the 2003 development approval package that her own developer's engineer prepared, and that has been sitting in the county planning office's public records for 21 years. She knows there is a pond. She does not know what the pond does at full discharge because the information that would tell her is on page 7 of a document no one at the HOA has ever read. And she has spent 6 years as board president enforcing view corridor easements from a marketing brochure without reading the county records carefully enough to know that the easements do not exist. She enforced the same way she governed, confidently, on the basis of assumed authority, without checking the instruments behind it. Phil says nothing for a moment. Then he says, "The western tier is going to be interesting on Wednesday." Gideon tells him he is welcome to drive out. Phil tells him he will be there Tuesday evening. He tells his father he wants to see the impoundment at full pool before the drawdown, and he wants to be present for the opening. He is a civil engineer. He has never seen the impoundment run at full discharge in his adult professional life. He was 17 the last time his father ran a full maintenance discharge, and he was not paying attention to the hydraulics the way he would pay attention now. Gideon tells him the spare room is made up. He ends the call and looks at the kitchen window for a long moment. The November dark outside, the eastern boundary invisible, the burn shelter invisible, the impoundment invisible on the slope above the access road, holding its 94% full pool in the cold November night, with the kind of patient, accumulated stillness that a body of water develops over 36 years of being managed by the same permitted operator who designed it. Wednesday is 40 hours away. He closes the logbook. He goes to bed at 9:30, the way he goes to bed every night on a working ranch schedule, and he sleeps without difficulty, the way a man sleeps when the documentation is complete, and the filing is done, and the notification has been submitted to the only party required to receive it, and the maintenance window opens at 7 a.m. on Wednesday, and everything that follows from that opening is within the operational rights of a private impoundment permit that has been in compliance for 36 consecutive years. Phil arrives Tuesday evening at 5:15, driving up the ranch road in his work truck with a topographic map of the corridor system on the passenger seat, a habit of his, bringing maps to the ranch, the civil engineer's instinct to see the physical landscape against the surveyed record before he forms an opinion about how water will move through it. They walk to the impoundment after dinner, in the dark, with flashlights. The same walk Gideon makes for the operational check, the path from the equipment barn down the slope to the pond's northern bank. Phil stands at the water's edge and looks at the full pool in the flashlight beam. the still surface, the inlet from the seasonal creek at the far end, the spillway structure at the southern face, the gate wheel in its locked position. He looks at the gate wheel for a long moment. Gideon tells him the full open position is 12 rotations clockwise. Phil nods. They walk back to the house. Phil spreads the topographic map on the kitchen table and traces the drainage corridor from the culvert outlet at the base of the access road to the point where it runs along the western tier of Creekside Commons. He identifies the low points in the corridor banks, the grade transitions, the locations where an overtopping event would push water laterally toward the adjacent lots. He identifies Lorraine Cutler's lot by its position, fourth from the southern end of the western tier, at the point where the corridor grade transitions from its steeper upper section to the flatter lower reach, the point where flow energy dissipates and volume accumulates. He puts his finger on the map. "Here," he says. Gideon looks at the map. "Yes," he says. They go to bed at 9:30. Wednesday opens at 7 a.m. Gideon and Phil are at the Spillway at 6:50 Wednesday morning. The November air is cold and still, the kind of cold that settles into a valley floor before sunrise, and holds until mid-morning, when the sun clears the eastern plateau and works through it. The impoundment surface is flat and dark in the pre-dawn light. 94% full pool, the seasonal creek still contributing at its autumn trickle rate, the pond holding its accumulated volume in the particular stillness of a body of water that has been building toward this morning since September. Phil stands at the southern bank and looks at the spillway structure, the concrete face, the steel gate mechanism, the culvert inlet below the gate that carries discharge under the access road to the drainage corridor outlet on the valley floor. He has seen the structure hundreds of times in his life, but he looks at it this morning with the specific attention of a civil engineer who spent Tuesday evening tracing a topographic map and knows exactly where the water goes from here and what it does when it gets there. Gideon checks the gate mechanism, the wheel, the gate rod, the seating seal that he inspected and re-greased in September as part of the pre-season operational check. Everything is in the condition he documented in September. The gate is operational. The culvert inlet is clear. He opens the logbook on the concrete spillway apron and writes the pre-operation entry. November 6th, 6:58 a.m. Impoundment level, 94% full pool. Gate condition, operational. Pre-discharge check complete. Maintenance operation commencing per permit, WA-1988-447, and Water Authority notification submitted November 4th. He picks up the gate wheel at 7:02, 12 rotations clockwise, the same sequence he has performed 11 times in 36 years. The wheel turns with the slight resistance of a well-maintained but infrequently used mechanism. Not stiff, not loose, the specific resistance of steel against steel with a good grease application. He counts the rotations. Phil watches from the bank. At the 12th rotation, the gate is fully open. For a moment, nothing appears to change. Then the water begins. Not the dramatic surge of a dam release, but the steady, accelerating flow of a large impoundment, finding its full discharge path. The volume building from the first trickle over the gate threshold to the full 7.8 cubic feet per second over the course of 90 seconds. The culvert inlet filling, and the flow sound changing from the open-air sound of falling water to the enclosed sound of a full culvert running at capacity. Gideon writes the opening time in the logbook, 7:02 a.m. Gate open, full discharge position, culvert running at full flow. Phil looks at the culvert inlet for a long moment, listening to the flow sound, running the mental calculations of a civil engineer who knows the culvert dimensions and the discharge rate and the travel time to the corridor outlet at the base of the access road. He says nothing. They go to feed the cattle. The drainage corridor at Creekside Commons' western edge runs along the back boundary of the western tier lots for its full lower reach, a graded earthen channel, approximately 8 feet wide at the base, with sloped banks that the developer's grading crew shaped in 2003 and that 21 years of seasonal flow have modified slightly with sediment deposition and vegetation growth. At controlled release rate, 2.4 cubic feet per second, the corridor carries its flow in the lower third of the channel cross-section, with comfortable freeboard above the water surface to the bank tops. At 7.8 cubic feet per second, the arithmetic is different. The culvert outlet at the base of Gideon's access road is 340 feet from the corridor's upper reach. The water arrives at the corridor at full discharge volume by 7:40, traveling the culvert length and the short open channel section between the culvert outlet and the corridor inlet at the flow rate of a full impoundment in high autumn pool condition. The corridor accepts the flow at 7:40. By 8:15, the water level in the corridor upper reach is visibly elevated. A resident on the western tier walking path notices it on her morning walk and pauses to look at it before continuing. The water surface is higher than she has seen it in the 6 years she has lived in the development, but it is still within the channel banks, and she does not think more of it. By 9 a.m., the corridor is at capacity. Water surface at the bank tops, along the full length of the western tier reach, the flow moving at the volume and velocity of a system running at its design limit. 2 residents notice this from their rear yards and post observations to the HOA forum. Corridor looks high this morning. Anyone else seeing this? No one responds for 40 minutes. By 10:30, the corridor is over capacity. The first overtopping occurs at the sediment bar that has accumulated on the corridor's east bank at the grade transition point, the flat lower reach that Phil identified on the topographic map Tuesday evening, his finger on the 4th lot from the southern end. The sediment bar has been building for 3 years, reducing the effective channel cross-section at that location, and it is the first point on the corridor where the bank is functionally lower than the rated design height. Water moves over the sediment bar into the graded margin of the adjacent western tier lot at 10:34. Once the overtopping begins, it does not stop. The full discharge volume has nowhere else to go. The corridor banks along the lower reach begin taking water laterally into the western tier rear yards, not as a wave, not as a surge, but as the steady, relentless lateral spread of a volume that exceeds the channel's rated capacity and finds the path of least resistance into the adjacent grade. By 11 a.m., there is standing water in the rear yards of 9 western tier properties. By 11:40, there is standing water in the rear yards of all 17. Lorraine Cutler's rear yard, the 4th property from the southern end, at the grade transition point Phil identified, the location where the overtopping began, has 12 inches of standing water by 11:15 and 18 inches by noon. Roy Cutler discovers it at 11:50. He is at his home office desk on the 2nd floor when he notices, through the rear window, that the color of the rear yard has changed. The brown November grass has disappeared under a flat gray surface that he processes for a moment before understanding that he is looking at water. He goes downstairs. He opens the rear door and steps onto the patio, and looks at 18 inches of standing water covering his rear yard from the drainage corridor bank to the back wall of the house's ground floor addition. He stands on the patio for a moment. He has no context for this. He does not know about the impoundment's full discharge operation. He does not know about the drainage corridor's capacity ratings. He does not know about the hydraulic analysis on page 7 of the 2003 development approval package. He does not know what his wife sent in a violation letter to a rancher in September, or what the rancher's hay shelter looked like on the morning of October 23rd, or what a civil complaint filed at the county courthouse on a Monday morning has to do with the 18 inches of water currently covering his rear yard on a Wednesday afternoon. He knows that his rear yard is underwater, and the water is not receding, and the back door threshold is 8 inches above the patio level, and the water surface is currently 10 inches above that. He calls the county emergency line at 2:15. The dispatcher takes his address and description and routes a county stormwater crew to the development. She also, as a matter of standard protocol for drainage-related flooding events, checks the upstream impoundment records for the affected watershed. The check takes 4 minutes and produces, from the State Water Authority's permit notification database, the discharge notification filed Monday morning against permit WA-1988-447. The one-page form identifying a scheduled maintenance full discharge opening at 7 a.m. Wednesday, November 6th. The dispatcher notes the upstream operation in the incident record and dispatches the stormwater crew. Phil is parked on the county road shoulder at the ranch access road when he sees the stormwater crew truck pass, heading toward the development. He checks his watch. It is 2:22 p.m. He calls Gideon and tells him the county crew has arrived at the development. Gideon tells him to note the time. Phil writes it in his own notebook. The civil engineer's habit, dating from years of construction site documentation. By 3 p.m., the Western Tier has 12 properties with water at or above rear door threshold level. The HOA office has received 41 calls. Lorraine is managing phone calls from her second floor, where the water has not reached, standing at the window, looking at her rear yard and the drainage corridor beyond it, the corridor that is visibly running over its banks, the water surface well above the graded channel edges, the flat gray expanse of it spreading across the Western Tier rear yards in both directions from her property. She has been the board president for 6 years. She has looked at the drainage corridor from the Western Tier walking path hundreds of times. She has seen the controlled release flow in the channel and noted it as part of the development's stormwater infrastructure. The unremarkable background operation of a drainage system that has functioned within its design parameters for 21 years. She is looking at it now, and it does not look like background infrastructure. She calls Patrick, the HOA's general counsel, at 3:15. He answers, and she tells him about the flooding. He asks her if there is an upstream impoundment on the adjacent property. She tells him there is a pond on the marsh property above the access road. He tells her to hold and pulls the county watershed records from his office database. He comes back on the line 2 minutes later. He asks her if she has ever read the drainage corridor hydraulic analysis in the 2003 development approval package. She tells him she does not believe she has. He tells her she should have. He tells her about page 7. Lorraine is quiet. The emergency board session convenes at 5 p.m. in the clubhouse, the eastern side building, above the flood level, dry and fluorescent lit in the November evening. All 5 board members are present. Lorraine is at the head of the table. Her eyes have the specific quality of someone who has been processing information for 6 hours, that reorganizes the shape of everything she thought she understood about her position. Tanya Osei arrives last. She sets her bag on the chair beside her and places 2 printed pages on the table in front of her before she sits down. Lorraine opens the meeting and begins describing the flooding situation, the Western Tier inundation, the county stormwater crew's assessment, the upstream impoundment discharge that Patrick confirmed from the watershed records. She is 2 sentences into the description when Tanya slides the 2 printed pages to the center of the table. Lorraine looks at them. The first page is an email from Tanya to Lorraine, dated 3 years earlier, a message flagging a county stormwater management bulletin that had identified drainage corridor capacity assumption vulnerabilities in residential developments built adjacent to registered upstream impoundments, and recommending that the HOA confirm the operational parameters of the marsh property impoundment with the property owner as a precautionary measure. The second page is Lorraine's reply. 2 sentences. Not our jurisdiction. File it. Tanya looks at the 2 pages on the table. Then she looks at Lorraine. She tells the board she sent the email 3 years ago after reading the county bulletin. She tells them she filed it when Lorraine replied. She tells them she has remembered it since 7:40 Wednesday morning, when she walked the Western Tier path on her routine morning walk and saw the drainage corridor running at elevated flow, and understood, with the specific professional recognition of a land use planner who has studied stormwater system behavior for 22 years, exactly what she was looking at and exactly how it had come to be there. She tells them she drove home and printed the emails before the board session. The room is quiet. Lorraine looks at her reply. Not our jurisdiction. File it. Sitting on the table in front of 5 board members, and does not speak. The 2 sentences are not long. They did not take long to write 3 years ago. They take considerably longer to sit with now, in a fluorescent lit room with 17 flooded properties outside and a civil complaint at the county courthouse, and a rancher's $31,000 hay stockpile burned to ash on a Thursday morning in October by a contractor executing a remediation action built on a marketing brochure phrase. Not our jurisdiction. Tanya looks at Lorraine. The room stays quiet. Gideon closes the spillway gate at 6 p.m. Wednesday evening, 11 hours after opening it, at the point the maintenance discharge protocol specifies for a full seasonal drawdown from high autumn pool, the point where the impoundment has released the volume it needs to release to reach its winter maintenance level, and the gate can be returned to the controlled release position for the cold months. He turns the wheel 12 rotations counterclockwise, the same 12 rotations in reverse, and listens to the flow sound in the culvert change from the full capacity sound of a system running at 7.8 cubic feet per second, to the quieter, narrower sound of controlled release. He writes the closing time in the logbook: 6 p.m., November 6th. Gate closed. Controlled release position. Maintenance discharge complete. Duration, 11 hours. He walks back up the slope to the equipment barn in the November dark. The water in the drainage corridor begins receding within 4 hours of the gate closure. The corridor's volume draining through its lower outlet as the upstream input drops from full discharge to controlled release, and the channel begins working through the accumulated volume at its own drainage rate. By Thursday morning, the western tier lots are draining visibly, the standing water pulling back from the rear yard margins toward the corridor channel. The flat gray surface that covered 17 properties through Wednesday afternoon, contracting toward its source. By Friday, the standing water is gone. What remains is the physical record of an 18-inch flood event, the kind of record that water leaves on a landscape with the same impartiality that a logbook leaves on paper. Waterlogged soil in the western tier rear yards, soft and dark in the November light. Debris lines on fence posts and foundation walls at the high water mark. The thin lines of leaves and organic material that moving water deposits at its maximum elevation and leaves as evidence when it recedes. The particular flattened condition of lawn grass that has been underwater for 6 hours. The silt deposits at the low points of the rear yard grades, where the water lingered longest before draining. The debris lines on the fence posts are at 18 inches. They will be visible for weeks. Lorraine Cutler resigns from the board presidency on Thursday afternoon. A single paragraph submitted to the board's administrative email, plain in language, brief in explanation. She thanks the community for the opportunity to serve. She does not mention the hay shelter. She does not mention the fire. She does not mention the view corridor easement that does not exist in the county records, or the contractor remediation authorization that the board voted 4-1 to approve, or the 2 sentences she sent Tanya 3 years ago. Not our jurisdiction. File it. That sat in a filed email while the Stormwater Management Bulletin and its recommendation gathered the particular dust of unacted upon administrative correspondence. She submits the resignation and does not attend any further board session. Tanya Osei assumes the interim board presidency by Friday morning. A board vote conducted by email, the same mechanism as the previous interim assumption, completed before 9 a.m. She has been thinking about what comes next since Wednesday morning on the walking path, when she saw the corridor running elevated and understood what she was looking at. She has been thinking about it through the emergency board session and through the 2-page email exchange on the conference table and through Thursday's drainage monitoring and through Lorraine's resignation notification arriving in her inbox Thursday afternoon. What comes next is Dessa Wainwright. She calls Dessa's office at 10 a.m. Friday. She identifies herself and her new role, and she tells Dessa 2 things without preamble. In the direct language of a former land use planner who has spent 22 years in rooms where the gap between what should have been done and what was done becomes visible, and who has no patience for the kind of institutional hedging that substitutes for accountability. The first is that the board is not contesting the deed, the easement absence, or the fire documentation. The eastern boundary deed is Gideon's, unencumbered. The view corridor easement does not exist in the county records and has never existed. The fire investigator's preliminary report says what it says. The board has retained Patrick for an assessment, and his assessment is the same as the one he gave the emergency board session 3 weeks earlier, delivered this time with the additional exhibit of 17 flooded properties and a resigned board president. The second is that the board wants full settlement, comprehensive, recorded, complete, not a negotiated partial resolution, not a payment and a handshake, a full recorded settlement that addresses the property damage claim, the legal fiction of the view corridor easement, and the structural condition that produced Wednesday's flooding. Specifically, the stockpile replacement and contractor damages, a recorded acknowledgement that the view corridor easement has no legal basis and no effect on Gideon's eastern boundary property, and a permanent stormwater management agreement formalizing Gideon's controlled release rate in exchange for a negotiated annual payment. The last item is Tanya's addition, not Dessa's requirement, not a term Gideon has asked for. Tanya has put it on the table because she is a land use planner who understands that the community's long-term exposure is not the civil complaint currently at the county courthouse, which has a finite resolution cost. The long-term exposure is the spillway, the permitted operational right of an upstream property owner who has demonstrated, in 11 hours on a Wednesday in November, exactly what full discharge looks like at the drainage corridor, and exactly what the corridor does with a volume 3 times its rated capacity. A formal recorded agreement that keeps Gideon operating at controlled release in exchange for an annual payment is not a capitulation. It is the instrument the 2003 developer should have negotiated before routing the development's stormwater management infrastructure through the drainage zone of an upstream private impoundment. It is the agreement that should have existed for 21 years. Tanya is putting it on the table now because she understands that the best time to create it was 2003. And the second best time is Friday morning with the debris lines still showing on the western tier fence posts. Dessa tells her she will call her client. She calls Gideon at 10:40. She tells him about Tanya's call. She tells him the board's position. No contest on the deed, no contest on the fire documentation. Full settlement including the stormwater management agreement. She reads him the proposed terms. Gideon is quiet for a moment. Then he says yes. The settlement conference runs 2 days the following week, Phil driving out from the county seat for both sessions, attending as Gideon's technical representative for the drainage agreement terms. He sits beside Dessa at the conference table with the topographic map and the hydraulic analysis, and his own engineering notes from the Tuesday evening map session, and he asks 4 questions during the stormwater agreement drafting. The corridor maintenance responsibility allocation, the controlled release rate measurement and verification protocol, the procedure for planned full discharge operations under the permit's maintenance provision, and the dispute resolution mechanism if the HOA claims a release event exceeded the controlled release rate. Each question tightens the instrument. The third question produces a provision that Dessa had not included in the draft, a recorded acknowledgement that full discharge maintenance operations under permit WA-1988-447 remain within Gideon's operational rights, regardless of the stormwater management agreement, as long as the 48-hour Water Authority notification requirement is met. The provision is Gideon's protection against a future board claiming the management agreement has converted his permitted operational rights into a restricted easement. Dessa looks at Phil when he asks the question. She thanks him. The settlement terms are finalized Thursday afternoon. Full replacement value of 340 bales of second-cut Timothy at current November market rate, plus damages, totaling $47,000. Permanent termination of the HOA's contractor relationship with Cutler Property Services, and a recorded acknowledgement of the firm's role in the October 23rd destruction. A recorded instrument acknowledging that no view corridor easement affecting Gideon's eastern boundary property exists or has ever existed in the county recorder system, and a recorded stormwater management agreement formalizing the controlled release rate as the HOA's operational baseline, with an annual payment to Gideon for the commitment, and the full discharge maintenance rights provision Phil's question produced. Gideon signs on Thursday afternoon in Dessa's office, each instrument where she marks the line, in the same order they are organized in the settlement package, completely and without skimming, the way he reads everything that has legal bearing on the property his family has owned since 1961. He thanks Dessa. He drives home. He passes the drainage corridor on the county road, the western tier visible from the road, the rear yards in their November condition, the debris lines on the fence posts still faintly showing at the 18-inch mark in the low afternoon light. The physical record of Wednesday, still present in the landscape 2 weeks after the water receded, the way a flood's evidence persists in a place long after the water itself is gone. He drives past without stopping. He goes home and feeds the cattle on the evening rotation. He goes inside and takes the logbook from the kitchen desk and carries it to the porch and sits in the November evening with it open on his knee. He writes the settlement terms in 4 sentences, the same plain sequential format as every entry that precedes them, going back to the September morning the first HOA letter arrived, and he wrote, "No view corridor easement in county records. Letter retained. File open." Then he writes in the margin, in the smaller script he uses for final notations, "Stockpile, replaced. Easement fiction, recorded null. Spillway agreement, signed. Matter closed." He closes the logbook. Phil calls at 7:30. "How do you feel?" he asks. Gideon looks east from the porch. The eastern boundary dark, the drainage corridor invisible in the November night. The development's lights visible on the plateau above the tree line. The same lights he has seen from this porch for 21 years. The roofline of a community whose developer built its drainage infrastructure on an assumption about his impoundment that nobody confirmed, and whose board president enforced a property restriction from a marketing brochure for 4 years without pulling the county records to check it. "I feel like ordering hay," Gideon says. Phil laughs, the short, genuine laugh of a son who has known his father long enough to recognize the specific satisfaction in that sentence, the completeness of a man who has documented everything, reacted to nothing, let the record build until it was ready, and is now thinking about the operational requirement that started the whole thing. 340 bales of second-cut Timothy, his cattle herd's winter feed, the thing that needs to be replaced before the hard frost settles in for the season. He orders 340 bales of second-cut Timothy the following morning from the district supplier he has worked with for 20 years. The delivery is scheduled for the following Tuesday. He notes the order in the operational log with the date, the supplier, and the quantity. Then he opens a fresh page in the logbook. He writes the date at the top. He goes out to check the morning cattle rotation, the same circuit he runs every day on this ranch. The north pasture, the water trough, the fence line, the slope check, the impoundment level in the operational log. The pond is at its winter maintenance level, the seasonal drawdown complete, the spillway gate in its controlled release position where it will stay until spring. The property is the same 340 acres it has been since 1961. The deed is clean. The permit is current. The logbook has a fresh page. He caps the pen and goes to work.